A graphic novel, a TV show. Well, it's not TV, it's HBO. And will this thing succeed? And by how much, man? And some might cheer and some might scoff because it's Damon Lindelof. But either way, we're off to watch some Watchmen. Watching Watchmen, talking Watchmen, analyzing Watchmen, and maybe arguing over Watchmen.
Welcome to Watchmen Watch, a podcast all about Watchmen, where we watch Watchmen, you watch Watchmen, we watch you watching Watchmen, you listen to Watchmen, you think about Watchmen, and sometimes you smell Watchmen. I'm Alex.
Well, I'm Justin.
I'm Pete.
And we actually have some news before we get into the show. Justin, what's going on?
Yeah, sorry. So the fourth host of our show is Alan Moore, obviously, and he is committed to this podcast, and he actually just texted me. We communicate via text.
Yeah.
And he just texted me. And
Wait, sorry, iMessage? Does he have an iPhone, or what's going on?
No, you know how like on an iPhone the text come up blue or green?
Yes.
It's come up like hot pink. So I don't know what he's. I think he may be texting from somewhere else.
Future?
But the future, the past. In this case, he texted me from the surface of Mars, where he's retracing the Doc Manhattan. He's doing a tour of all the Doc Manhattan. He's setting
Wait, is he running the tour, or is he taking the tour?
Are you talking
actually-
about Juicy Couture?
No. No, I'm not talking about that. That's a good guess, though, because I'm often talking about that.
Yeah.
No, he's
He
setting
does.
up.
We should mention he's often, when he is here for the podcast, he's usually wearing those short shorts that say "Juicy" on the back.
Yes, but he has taken his name off the back of his short shorts.
Yes.
So he is setting up in the New York, there's a Sex and the City tour for all the locations where Sex and the City took place.
Sure,
so
yeah.
he's doing that for Watchmen. So he's on
smart.
scouting on the
That's
surface
fun.
of Mars.
That's fun. You could see a newsstand. You could see a wall.
A pirate ship made of dead bodies.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, good time. Good time. Well, hopefully he will be back for next week's podcast.
He definitely will. He said.
Oh, he did?
He 100%.
Oh, okay.
He's
That's
definitely
great.
here next week.
Well, this week we are continuing our tour through Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' classic comic book series. We're going to be talking about the fourth issue Watchmaker of the book as we ramp up to HBO's premiere of Watchmen on October 20th. So that's pretty exciting.
Very exciting.
Now, before we get into this book, though, I did want to ask you, Justin, you've worked at bars before, right?
Yes.
Do you know, how do you make
As a bartender.
As a bartender.
And dancer.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Exotic.
Don't.
Yeah, well, both exotic and regular dances.
Regular.
I'm the stripper that does the Macarena.
Yeah. I love that when they have that on a sign outside where they're like, exotic and regular dancers.
Exactly.
Regular
You want the
style.
Full buffet, regular style dancing.
Yes. How do you make a Manhattan? What's in a Manhattan?
Manhattan, I mean, there's some variations, but it's you want to mix your bourbon, your brown, whatever it is, whiskey. Bourbon is sort of the popular one now. Your sweet vermouth, a little bit of bitters, and cherry.
No. How would you make a Dr. Manhattan, do you think?
Oh, add Dr. Pepper on top.
I don't think that would be good.
Cool. You said that with such urgency.
Yeah,
I've never heard you speak so quickly.
Yeah.
No, you just make it regular and then stir it with your penis.
Do you got to make your penis blue before you stir it?
What color is your penis? My bad.
Oh, boy. All right, let's get into the book. Now, this issue, as we implied, is all about Dr. Manhattan. Go back and tell his origin. The things that have happened very briefly in the book so far. Edward Blake, the comedian, has been murdered. Rorschach, a vigilante, one of the few remaining vigilantes, has been investigating his murder. And through a series of circumstances that we don't know exactly how they come together, unless you've read the book already, like we have, like most of our listeners probably have led to Dr. Manhattan fleeing Earth after he was accused of giving multiple people, including his old love, Jenny Slater, cancer. And he is headed to Mars, and he's hanging out on Mars with an old photo of him in his human guise of John Osterman before he was changed into Dr. Manhattan and Jenny Slater, and that's kind of where we left him alone.
Janie
Slater, excuse me, alone on Mars. Now, here's the thing that I thought structurally was pretty fascinating about this issue in particular. We've been talking a lot about the juxtaposition that Moore and Gibbons have been working throughout. This is the first issue that, in a certain sense, doesn't have that juxtaposition, doesn't have panels that are describing different things, that are dialogue that is describing different things that's happening in the panels, because it's all juxtaposition. It's all happening at the same time for Dr. Manhattan. It almost in that way takes a step back and pauses in terms of the pacing.
And just tailors the story to the character. It's, I mean, this standalone issue, this comic series is amazing, obviously. We talk about that a lot. The first 3 issues are very good, a lot of setup, great mystery, juxtaposition. But this issue as a standalone issue is, I think, a masterpiece. This is like the masterpiece of the series.
Really? A masterpiece?
Truly, like, the way this story is told is so smart, and other comics have used this type of storytelling, but this was like the first issue that was like used all these big physics ideas, and
is it because we finally get the black G-string in this issue that we're not having to see just the junk? It's covered up a little bit. Is that why you?
Yes, that's what I mean. Again, Juicy Couture and G-strings is what we're all about on this podcast.
Yep.
No, it's just like it's such a unique way of telling the story that fits in with the character and also just keeps us guessing while also getting out a ton of exposition and having this anxiety that just runs through the whole issue that plays into the larger series, which is all about tension and the stress of impending disaster.
Right. Well, the other thing that we're dealing with a lot here that we've talked about again earlier on the podcast is, what is Dr. Manhattan, and can he feel emotion? And that's something that we're wrestling with a lot in this issue, because there were moments where it feels like, even in his Dr. Manhattan guise, that he is doing things emotionally. He is spurred on by humanity, but the way that he describes it, because almost this entire thing is through his own internal monologue, he is saying, no, this is all just inevitable. This is all just happening at the same time for me. I don't feel anything about any of these things. But I take it pretty clearly as that's not true. Like, I think there is... One of the things that this issue emphasizes, that Dr. Manhattan, despite everybody being terrified about him being God, he's at best a god, and not even that. He has limitations.
Well, I think he just has godlike powers. He has the power to sort of see everything at once and manipulate the world around him. But it's all science-based. It's not like he has a mystical God powers. But I also think it's just a function of the way his life is now, where because he's aware of everything, only the big impact moments sort of reach him. Everything evens out because he sees it all like reading a book.
Yeah.
Like when we're reading a book, reading a comic, like rarely do we cry. Only like a huge moment gets us to really feel that emotion. Otherwise, we're just sort of watching these characters.
No, that's an interesting point to think about it as a comic book, because what Moore and Gibbons are doing is dealing with the structure of a comic book and the impact of comic books and superhero comic books in particular through the 12 issues of Watchmen. And here, you could probably argue that Dr. Manhattan sees the world as a comic book.
Yeah.
That he sees it
that he's
as
authoring in a way.
Right. And he's seeing it as these various still panels that, depending on how you read it, you read one panel at a time, or you're looking at the entire page and seeing 9 things at the same time.
Right. And I think that's what it is, because he's not omnipotent. He is just aware of much more at once. Because that's why I do think he does still have, like, when he is confronted with the idea that he killed all these people that are close to him, he's affected by it, and it causes him to run away. And I think those emotions are real. He's suffering. He's feeling this horrible guilt. But it's only these emotions like guilt that are powerful and get him in that way.
Well, that's the omnipotence thing is underlined pretty well. One of the scenes that we get in the comic book is we go back to that meeting, the one meeting of the crime busters that happened. And in it, actually, I don't know if it's in the meeting of the crime busters or it's somewhere else in the issue. He sees Moloch, but he doesn't know who Moloch is. Like, he doesn't recognize him.
Right.
So it's not that he's omniscient. He doesn't know everything about everything all the time. He can't identify everything all the time. It's just that he understands things in his own lifetime.
Yeah.
I'll throw something else out at you that just occurred to me, but there's that big scene towards the middle where they're trying to give him a symbol and they're giving him the atomic bomb signal, and he's like, no, that's ridiculous. That doesn't exist. Instead, I'll use this thing. And instead he draws, I believe it's a hydrogen molecule, right?
Hydrogen atom.
Yeah, hydrogen atom, which is just a singular thing. So what's being emphasized here is that all he sees is his own life through himself. That's it. He can't see through Janie Slater's life. He can't see through Laurie's life. He can't see through Eddie Blake's life or anything like that. He's not reading people's minds. He's just experiencing all these things that happen to him at the same time. And a corollary note that I'll throw out there on the throwing against him being a god front is he's only jumping through his own lifetime. Like, he's not being like, and now I'll go back to medieval times, or I'm going into the far future.
I'm going to go kill Hitler or something.
Right, exactly. He's just existing in the span of his own lifetime, which, granted, is potentially forever at this point from the point that he's created on, but he's not going backwards or forwards any farther than that.
Yeah. And he also, the way it's written, it almost feels like he's just going backwards. He talks a little bit about, because the narration he's doing is looking back. And he's talking about how in that time he was aware of the future, but you don't see him, he never is aware of the future in the present of the comic we're reading, if that makes sense. So, like, it's almost like he's just remembering shit.
Right.
So it definitely is not, he's not as strong or as powerful as he's positioned in the book.
Right. I think you could argue that that's all of us, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys experience this, but certainly I'll spend a lot of time, like, certainly when I'm at my most restful, where my brain will immediately, like, flash on something that happened 30 years ago that potentially I was embarrassed about or I felt bad about, or maybe sometimes a good experience as well.
Get into it. Get into it, Alex. Let's have a little flash.
Real quick, here's my top 5 most embarrassing experiences.
Yeah. This also... Oh, go ahead.
I was also just going to talk a little bit about the paneling a little bit, and, like, how when it does break from the panel, it does it in such a dramatic fashion. And, like, the stuff where you see him as this giant during wartime is such a powerful, like, huge thing that, like, really kind of showcases the damage that he can do. And I think one of the reasons that, like, he retreats and kind of starts his own little world that he creates on Mars is, like, this is his kind of, like, safe place. And it kind of shows how vulnerable and how, like, you know, childlike he is, and how, you know, affected he is by all the things that he maybe did wrong in his life.
He just needs to go to his little special secret place and build a castle, a crystalline castle, and let it go.
Right, because he's really clearly let go of the fact that his dad threw a watch over the balcony back when he was younger. So he builds an entire watch castle on Mars.
That's cool.
As one does.
As one does.
Speaking of children, let's talk about Laurie a little bit. Let's talk about Silk Spectre. So John Osterman, a.k.a. Dr. Manhattan, he's kind of an older man, right?
Yes.
Kind of an older gentleman.
He says how old he is. He's very old.
Yes, he's very old. He starts dating Laurie seemingly when she's 16, according to his story.
Yes. Well, that's what Janie says. What is she, 16, 17? So it's not 100% clear how old she is, but young is the watchword.
Well, she says, what is she, 16, 17? And then they give the year and they jump forward a certain, I think, 4 years to her 20th birthday.
Yeah.
So you can kind of figure out that she's 16 when they first make out on the roof.
Yeah.
That's pretty fucked up.
Yeah. Especially he's like 50.
I
just wanted to point out that it's fucked up.
Yep.
Yes, I agree. And he straight up just bails on his wife because she's too old for him.
Right.
Like, they go so far to say that he is so powerful and so aware of everything, yet he does this, like, total scumbag move.
Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think that is character-wise? Because I get the way that Dave Gibbons draws it and the way that he draws their expressions, forgetting about Laurie for a second, it does feel like there's honest emotion happening on Dr. Manhattan's face. Whether he's faking it or not, whether he's saying this is a simulacrum of a human being that I'm impersonating right now or not, I don't know. But to me, it feels like he truly is reaching out for that companionship that Laurie is providing on the roof, not just giving her what he thinks she wants like he does later on when he gives her the threesome that ultimately breaks the bond.
Right. I mean, I guess if you're taking his powers for what it is, it makes sense that he would want to keep consistency because he remains constant. So he's trying to have the same thing he had with Janie is with this now. He's having the younger version. So it's all constantly this same like young wife that he's had. And that's where the time he is stuck in that time.
Is that your take on it, Pete?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, Dr. Manhattan is a tough read, you know. He is so stoic and so powerful. It's kind of tough to know what's going on. I kind of just, it's a little too creepy to think about for me. But I think that, like...
I think a good thing to do on our podcast is not confront the problematic parts of the comic book.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, just avoid them as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I mean, like, if you really... it's not necessarily about the creepiness. I'm wondering now, what is Dr. Manhattan thinking when he hooks up with Laurie? Forgetting about her age for a moment, which is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
It's hard to separate it.
Okay.
I also think it could be if he is fully aware of everything that's happening in the story, then it is important that he be with her to set up the narrative structure that saves the world. So
I think that's possible. I think he's just honestly looking for emotion. Like he's looking for that purity of emotion that comes with youth, of being 16 or 17 when you feel things so much stronger. Something that really hit me very hard is his repeated flashes back to that first moment when he touches fingers with Janie.
Yeah,
when they're passing over
the mug of beer.
Yeah.
And what's crazy when rereading this comic for the second or third, fourth, fifth time, it's like...
All right, no need to brag.
Well, I'm just saying that, like...
a lot of time on his hands over here.
Sometimes when you're repeating things like in movies or television or other comic books, I get mad when they're repeating things, when it's like undercutting. It feels like they're undercutting my ability to retain what's happening in the story. But here it's done in such an artistic way that it's like when you see it again, it's kind of an aha moment and really kind of makes it a little bit more powerful.
Well, in a lot of ways, he's trapped in the life he had before he became Dr. Manhattan. So he's always trying to replicate the cogs of a clock, the first relationship when he first fell in love. Yeah. He's continually replicating that, despite the fact that he's the most powerful person in the world.
I definitely think that's it, but I also think it gets back to that thing I was mentioning earlier with those still moments bringing back those memories. I will definitely get to my most traumatic memories by the end of this podcast.
Gotta
episode.
get there.
We'll
I have some photos.
Countdown.
I have a photo.
bunch of photos?
I have a bunch of photos. I'm going to have you just drop them onto the surface of this room we're in.
Oh, which is Mars.
Which is Mars,
course.
as we said.
But I think at the same time, you have those positive feelings. Like, I don't know if you ever think about this, but when you are with a person you love, you don't necessarily sit down and be like, let me review our entire relationship as it has happened thus far.
No, every conversation with my wife begins and ends with how we met up till that exact moment.
Oh, okay. You just recap it?
Yeah, well, it's like a recap podcast.
I'm sure
everybody
that
loves
get
those.
boring.
No.
But you think about those moments. You think about those moments when your hands first touch. That's where that spark, that throb of emotion came out of you. And I think that's what... All right, buddy. That's
throb.
It's true.
Throb of emotion. Okay.
Throb of emotion.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that big vein of emotion.
Oh, wow. Porno Shakespeare over here.
Guys, I'm trying to say something real here. All right?
Okay.
I'm trying to have a moment with you guys.
Yeah, cool.
But I think that's what Dr. Manhattan is trying to get back in a certain way. Like, he remembers that. He remembers those strongest moments. Those are the things that get him back to his humanity. I think it's the same thing with Laurie on that roof. I think it's the same thing through various points in this issue, not necessarily when he's acting as Dr. Manhattan, but when he is trying to get back to John Osterman.
Yeah.
And it's just not working. Like, ultimately, he goes to Mars to completely escape his humanity. Like, that's the least human thing you could do, is teleport yourself to Mars and build a castle there. But what does he build a castle of? He builds a castle out of cogs of a watch, going back to his formative moment when his father threw it off the balcony.
I think he's just a huge fan of Frozen.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he's Elsaing a castle. On
Do you
the surface
think,
of
are you
Mars.
saying this right now, that Watchmen ripped off Frozen? Do you think?
Exactly. Well, Dr. Manhattan can see the future, so he backloaded that reference.
I think it's reverse. I think Frozen ripped off Watchmen.
Do you think so? Why?
yeah.
Because just that's how time works?
Yep.
Huh.
It's interesting. I will say that there is that panel right at the end where he's on Mars and he sings the entirety of Let It Go.
Yeah.
That it feels like...
Feels like a direct reference.
It does.
It does,
It does feel like a connection
feels
there.
Purposeful.
Yeah, and the fact that his sister is named Anna.
Yeah. And the tiny snowman that's stupid the whole time.
Oh, come on.
Whoa.
Sorry, I've seen that movie.
His name is Rorschach.
Yeah. Great. I've seen that movie too many times.
Yes, same here. Should we? What else should we talk about in this book? I mean, true to form, we've been jumping around in time here as we've been talking through it, rather than walking through page by page. But we could probably talk about his origin moments as well.
I like just from a pure superhero origin standpoint. I thought this was great. Like the origin itself of the character, he gets access. He's going back into the this radiation chamber to get the watch that he repaired to. For his true love, he gets trapped in there, and everyone has to watch him be destroyed. And they slowly come. Like this is just a great character origin outside of all of the secondary commentary about the world and everything around it.
Now, there's been a lot of arguments about what the characters in Watchmen are references to, what Alan Moore was working for here, because the way that I heard it was originally this pitch happened with the Charlton characters, which includes Blue Beetle and Captain Atom and other characters like that, but ultimately DC said, no, you can't use those, so he created these other characters that were semi-analogs to them, which is why Rorschach is like the Question, and Night Owl is like Blue Beetle, and of course Dr. Manhattan is like Captain Atom in terms of that. But I also think like there's, even with the darkness here, there's kind of a sense of Superman going on a little bit that he's riffing on.
Yeah, I mean, they call him Superman.
Right.
America has its own Superman.
Right. And as we know from reading Under the Hood, they did have Superman as a comic book that existed, so that reference does exist in the world of Watchmen for them to pull on.
Plus, I think it's a good point here is if you have somebody you care about and then you have some object that you care about, you got to give up on the objects and stick with the people because otherwise you'll just die in a horrible scientific accident.
I've never thought that. People over objects?
Yeah.
Oh, I just love objects.
No, man.
Well, I'm just saying
If it was a
it might
choice
kill
to-
you someday.
If it was a choice to throw my phone in a ravine or you guys, I would pick you guys every time.
Wow.
Wow. I hate to...
I love my phone.
You can get a new phone.
I gotta play my Candy Crush. Can't go a day without hitting my levels.
All right, we're skipping our trip to the ravine this week. I have a feeling Alex is
But it's the
saying,
anniversary.
nope, we're not going to the ravine. We're not going to the ravine this year again, Pete.
smart.
Alex is going to kill us.
It's smart.
Yeah. Well, to your point, though, it is him returning to these moments to hold on to his humanity, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes, which is tenuous, like getting away from him.
Yes.
But why? Why is he losing? Is he losing more humanity as he goes on because his powers work that way, or is it what? What's making him lose his humanity?
I think
The powers, yeah.
I think it's growing up. Honestly, like it's getting older. Like as you get older, you get further and further away from the person you once were, and if you feel like your formative time was in your 20s. You do constantly want to get back to that. You want to grasp at that again.
College.
Really? 20s?
No, I'm saying if you feel that way, like he does, I
'cause
think.
I
Like
feel
John,
like 8, 10 was my sweet spot.
That shows.
Constantly-
That's 100% shows.
years old. That was your
that's
peak.
that's where I'm constantly trying to get back
Very
to.
rooted
Oh my
in the
God.
8 to 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not there yet. I haven't reached my peak. It's just been an uphill
Oh,
the
my
entire
God.
time.
Yeah, no,
Dude,
exactly.
I got some bad news for you, man.
What? I'm sitting in a back room in a theater taping a Watchmen podcast.
Wow.
Yep.
That's not news. A couple of things I want to talk about. I feel like this reference, I'm a big fan of Kurt Vonnegut, the writer.
Oh, here we go.
And this feels very much like
I went to
Slaughterhouse Five.
college with him.
Yeah, no, with him?
Well, at him.
Oh, okay.
I went to Cornell and he went to Cornell. It's no big deal. Go on. With
I know.
what
I
you're saying.
actually went to Cornell to see him speak, which was very cool.
Great. You should have said hi.
Yeah, why
I know.
didn't you say hi?
Because Alex didn't know that we knew each other then, but I did because I'm Dr. Manhattan.
Oh, snap.
But I'm Dr. Manhattan for upstate New York, so I'm like Dr. Syracuse. It's much worse. It's much worse. I can only see SU basketball scores for the future. Great. Everyone
You
knows
make
what
a
I'm
lot of money that way.
in Slaughterhouse 5, there's a similar device used in that story where the character's slipping through time. And I I don't know if that's a specific reference that Alan Moore was making, but I love that book. I love the connection here. And I think the point of it in the book is that in times of like World War II and these times where the world is sort of being shattered, it shatters time itself and the narrative. And I think that's what we're seeing here a little bit as well. The stakes are high for all the characters. The world's maybe coming to an end, both the impending World War III or Dr. Manhattan or whatever's happening that we don't know yet causes this loosening of time.
Yeah.
I just want to get back to something we talked about. If you drop something on the tracks, just leave it, okay? Your phone is not really worth your life, okay? Just, if you are standing on the subway platform and you drop something, don't try to go down and get it.
We should mention Pete works for the MTA.
Yeah.
That's important to establish here. Let's talk about another aspect that's just fascinating in terms of the world building of this whole series. So there's certain points that deviate not just from DC comic superhero history, but also from our history and everything else that's going on. One of the first points where it deviates is when Hooded Justice shows up. This real vigilante superhero shows up in the quote-unquote real world that starts to deviate things on a path away from superheroes in comic books, brings in these masked heroes. And then Dr. Manhattan, of course, is another big leap forward here. But something that he adds in that Adrian Veidt, a.k.a. Ozymandias, pivots off of is that he is able to completely technologically change the world. He's able to bring back dirigibles. He's able to add different power and technology.
Electric cars.
Yeah, so part of what we're seeing... and we've talked about this, we've touched on this throughout the podcast, is just like superheroes didn't necessarily make the world better, I don't think Dr. Manhattan's technology made the world better either. Because what we see is a world very close to anarchy. We see a world on the brink of destruction, on the brink of World War III. And also we've seen a lot of grimy downtown New York places that are very out of the 70s and 80s in real New York. But it's not a great place to live. It's not a good place to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's somewhat the point. Like, This is an anti-superhero book in a lot of ways, and
it's
I think
an anti-New York book.
No, I don't think it's that.
He wouldn't.
All right, MTA official.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It's pointing to the fact that all this technology is working for the wealthy, and it's making that part better. Because in any scenes with rich people, we'll see they're living the high life, while downtown, even somebody like Dan Dreiberg is living in a really bad part of town. His lock keeps getting busted, mind you. Mostly it's by Rorschach.
Yeah, dude hates locks.
Yeah, but there's gangs everywhere. There's graffiti everywhere. Dr. Manhattan hasn't made the world better at all.
Yeah, and I think that's because of his he's just solving problems. He's not thinking about the larger issues. He's not helping people. He's like just working on equations.
Well, that's something that gets emphasized. His first superhero encounter is with Moloch the Mystic, who is this fun character, very out of the 60s, very Adam West Batman. Every other masked hero talks about how much fun he was to fight. Like, they clearly are very nostalgic about it. But Dr. Manhattan goes in and immediately just blows up one of his goons' heads.
This panel, I think, is it's like a perfect panel.
Yeah.
It's so good. And also, so that I want to talk about this. He has a line here where he says, "The morality of my activities escapes me," meaning like, I blew that dude up, whatever. Like, they wanted me to fight crime, so I did. And then, 5-7 pages later, he's flashing to when he's in Vietnam meeting Comedian, and there's another line. Blake is interesting. I've never met anyone so deliberately amoral. And I thought that was an interesting choice of amoral as opposed to immoral, because Dr. Manhattan is amoral. He loses his ability to understand morals or like humans in general. And I think he's scared of the Comedian because he's worried he sort of could become that.
Yeah.
But I think it's weird that he calls him amoral, because I think the Comedian is immoral. He's someone who knows morals, and he's like, I do the opposite.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
So I think that's a weird moment there. I just noticed that on this reading. Like, he's calling the Comedian amoral when he himself is amoral, and the Comedian's actually immoral.
Right.
So I think it's
do you think that has something to do with the fact that he understands the realization that the Comedian eventually gained to, potentially? That the Comedian at the end of his life did understand good and bad, and that there was none of that. Like, there's no gradation there, that it's all fucked because ultimately the world is going to get blown up no matter what they do. But I guess to the point we were making earlier, Dr. Manhattan might not know that. Like, he might not know that because he wasn't there.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. Another thing that I think I wanted to touch on a little bit is his relationship with Adrian Veidt here. So we know where the comic book is going to end up. We know where the series is going to end up. He meets Adrian Veidt, and if he's really living every single bit of his life all at the same time, when he meets Adrian Veidt, he knows exactly what's going to happen. And there's an interesting panel in here of them shaking hands for the first time that makes me wonder in that moment, how much does Dr. Manhattan know? And the answer is probably all of it, right?
I mean, it's hard. That's the thing, is we don't really know. I would think, no, he doesn't know that. But that's why, like, it's hard to tell what his powers are.
Right.
And how much he's sort of talking up his godlike powers when it really is sort of retroactive, as opposed to him actually in this moment when he's sitting with him in his Antarctic fortress and he's like, this dude's going to eventually try to destroy the world.
Right.
Because the way it's played, I feel like maybe he's sort of, in the last panel, he's sort of touching his chin like, what's up with this guy?
Yeah.
Like, it feels like he's questioning as opposed to being like...
Right, so maybe he isn't able to actually see the end of all things. Maybe he doesn't necessarily know.
Which, kind of undercuts his intelligence a little bit, because if you go to a giant Antarctic layer... That should be a very big sign that says this guy is evil.
Except Adrian Veidt, even if he's not supernaturally smart, he really is the smartest man in the world, or he's a very smart man, right? So if he knows that Dr. Manhattan knows everything that happens around him, he has been very careful to make sure that Dr. Manhattan sees nothing other than what he wants to see. The other thing that's interesting about that is, in a certain sense, Dr. Manhattan is complicit in what Adrian Veidt is doing, because as we find out, Adrian Veidt's technology is based on what Dr. Manhattan was able to do.
Right.
So perhaps there's a sense of Dr. Manhattan pushing that down, using his humanity, being embarrassed by the fact that he is going to help bring about this apocalyptic scenario.
But also, isn't Dr. Manhattan sort of, he is all the imagery and all the clock talk in here, he's a big cog in the clock of the universe, or of Earth, or whatever you want to say. I mean, a cog doesn't know what time it is. A cog is just doing its job in the clock to make sure it ticks. So I think maybe that's a better sort of way of understanding his powers. Like, he may be aware of the passage of time and that it's going to be noon later, but the cog is incapable of changing its actions. It's only continuing to tick.
So what you're saying is, in a certain sense, they ripped off Beauty and the Beast because he's the Cogsworth of this particular comic.
Think about it. It's a tale as old as time.
Pete, anything additional you want to say about this book? About this issue?
I just think it's interesting that there's like notes of Dr. Manhattan should be more aware of what's happening, and it's kind of his humanity that is dumbing him down a little bit.
I do think part of that, I was thinking about this while I was reading the issue, and I do think part of that is the artifice of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons releasing a monthly comic book that's based on a mystery. And they can't be like, Dr. Manhattan flashes the end and be like, and here's what Adrian Veidt was doing. Because that's approximately 8 issues too early or so. So they can't show you that. He may know, but we're only seeing what they want us to see at this particular time. So I understand what you're saying, but I think like it's a structural thing as well.
You're saying he's bullshit, though.
Yeah.
Well, you just can't he just threw a doctor in front of his name. He's not.
No, he's not a doctor.
Wow. If we called you Dr. Pete, it would make you good at surgery.
That's true.
We did, by the way. That's why I don't have this arm.
Yeah.
Nice.
Needed an armectomy.
Sorry about that.
Hey, it's all good, bro. I only need one arm to read comic books.
Yeah.
That's cool.
50 pages.
Yeah.
If you want to support this podcast, patreon.com/Comic Book Club. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. at the People's Improv Theater Loft in New York. Come on down. We'll chat with you about Watchmen. A couple of things we can plug. You can check us out socially at Watchmen Watch 1 on Twitter. Also, Watchmen Watch Podcast on Facebook and Watchmen Watch Podcast on Instagram. You can subscribe a bunch of places: iTunes, Android, Stitcher, Spotify, or the app of your choice. And remember, we taped this podcast 35 minutes ago.
Sorry to interrupt. Alan just texted me
Oh, great.
a video of him on Mars singing Let It Go. And he said it'll definitely be here next week.